Hello everyone, welcome to week 40. We're done 40 of these now. Week 40 of Tuesday Tips. Today we're talking about 7x7 centers, part 1. Just like 6x6 centers, we're doing 2 weeks. First week's going to be more general idea of what we're doing. We're building super advanced 7x7 centers. Week 2 is going to be specific inspection, specific tips for each center. So I guess we might as well get ahead and get going. So the first thing we're going to talk about in 7x7 centers, which is probably the most specific thing to 7x7 centers themselves, is dealing with the middle bar. So if you don't, I'm pretty easy to know what I'm talking about. So on 7x7, obviously it's an even numbered cube, meaning there's an even number of centers. And this middle bar right here is the key to getting good centers. Not the key, but it's the most important thing to keep track of, because if you screw it up, it's going to really ruin your life. So to first illustrate this, let me solve through my first center. I'm going to solve first 2 centers real quick. Or most of them. I'll just solve them all because I'll make it... Oops. Wrong piece. Alright. Let's say you got this. You're building your let's just say you have this. Let's say you got this. You built your first center on yellow, you built your second center, and then you left your middle bar to last, but you weren't too smart with it, and you got this piece stuck here. You got 2 options. One, I'll go over, this will probably end up being in a walkthrough. You build your bar like this, you do this slice, like, that's terrible. Or you do this other option where you pull the piece out, then you build it, then you insert it. Oh, that's also terrible. Those both will add like 1, 2, maybe even 3 seconds to your solve. That's like so bad. You can't be doing that. So the biggest thing you got to think about when you're doing your super advanced centers, in addition to all the other stuff that you're obviously thinking about, is when are you building your middle center? The middle center has a slightly higher priority than the other centers because A, it's harder to pull the pieces out. So if you're building here, one sec, I'm gonna build it's easier to get a natural case, so I build a center first. So if I'm building, I built white first, obviously, and now I'm building my second center. So, like you can see here, I have yellows here. I'm inserting this bar. I can pull these left side yellows out with this insert. Pretty standard, right? But now look, now that I have this bar locked in place, I can only insert bars like vertically like this, and I can no longer pull out these pieces right here. As soon as I put in that bar, these pieces are now locked. Luckily, I can still build the middle center because look, I have there's 1, 2, you need 4, you need 2 of the pieces adjacent to the center and 2 of the pieces farthest away from the center to build your middle bar. And so you can have 4 locked up here. I have 1, 2, and 3, or I have 2 of the outer pieces here, 1 here and here, and 1 of them here, 1 in the middle piece here, so I can still build the middle bar. The key is to be watching and kind of keeping track in your head. So at some point, you're going to be forced to build the middle center, essentially. So now here, we have just enough pieces. So we have 2 of these pieces locked up, and we have 2 of the other pieces locked up. We have just enough pieces to build the middle bar, but no more. So at this point, if we insert another bar, we can no longer build the middle bar without pulling out these pieces, which is a terrible waste of time. So at this point, you're now forced to build the middle center if you don't want to waste a bunch of time. This is kind of key in 7x7 center building, is that the middle center has a higher priority because of the pieces that get locked up. In my previous Tuesday tip video where I talked about building the middle bar first, just as a kind of a general rule, this is the exception. Well, it's not the exception, it's more the extension of this idea. It's not that you need to build it first, but you need to know that as a higher priority, and you need to be tracking when you have to build it. If you put in your first 2 bars like this, and there's no middle pieces locked up, it doesn't matter. There's no priority on it anymore. You can build it last, you can build it whenever you want. It doesn't matter because you're not going to have to do that terrible thing I showed earlier. That's the key here, is you got to be able to track and know when you need to build the middle bar, because it is different. It's easy to pull out pieces. It's sort of extensible to the other bars, but you can pretty much pull pieces out of the other bars much easier with less slices. So yeah, that's the big thing, middle bar. Okay, so next we're going to talk about is similar to 6x6 when we were talking about 2x5s. It's the same thing, just 2x4s. It's literally, not 6x6 is 2x4s. Now we're talking about 2x5s. It's literally the exact same thing. It gets a little trickier because there's some more cases. Because on 6x6, you're either building... yeah, this is a 6x6. You're either building like a 2x4 here, or you're building it in the middle. That's the only option. In 7x7, you're building it on the outside, or you're building it along the middle right here, which is a mirror of this, which is a little bit... It's different. It's much trickier because you can get cases like... You start to see things like this on super advanced building, and then you got to realize, okay, so I got to pair up a middle center with a corner center. So that's going to look like... But you got to do it in the right spot, so that's going to look like this. And then I got to pair up another one to make that. Things like that are what you can do. This is also just kind of showing you stuff. It can take a lot of... That can take a lot of practice. The last thing specific to 7x7 that I really do is building... So you can also build from the middle out. So you can... The other options would be middle out building. So you build essentially a 5x5. Felix does this more than me, although I told him to stop because it's not very good. You essentially build a 5x5 center in the middle, and then you build 3x1s or 1x4s or something to attach onto it. This is honestly, I literally never do this because of how bad it is almost always. The only times I ever do it is when, usually more often than not, if I do end up doing this, it's because I get a case more similar to, let me just build it on white. I'm building everything on white today. I get a case kind of similar that looks like, it'll look more like this. It'll look like this. So this, you're like, oh, if I make two 3x1s, if I make the middle 3x1, there's one, and then I make the second one, there's two, and then I built a 3x5 across the middle. 7x7, you can build 3x5s. Only do 3x5s, I'd recommend if it's incredibly obvious, because these are 2x5s are already super tricky. The recognition is impossible. 3x5s are just like a nightmare. I almost only build them on the first center. They're insanely difficult to do. Obviously, you can build 3x5s. You don't have to do them on the middle. You could do them on the outer. Even harder because it's not symmetrical. If you do like the outer three, even harder. I'd extremely not recommend that. But the middle ones are okay if it's really easy. Definitely situational. So 2x5s, pretty much the same thing as 6x6, but it's 2x5 instead of 2x4. And then 3x5 is very situationally. The last thing I wanted to talk about is kind of stuff that is specific to 7x7 versus 6x6 because you have a middle piece. So that allows things like, so on a 6x6, if you do, okay, let's get this. If you have, so say you want to make, okay, so this is just an example. Say you're making this blue, ignore this stuff. So making this, ignore that. Okay, so I'm making this blue bar. You can go with these two and these two. Boom. And in this case, there's no middle piece, so all of these pieces can go up and then like that. In 7x7, you gotta notice for cases like this where if you do, it's the same thing as 5x5 essentially, where you're doing an outer layer to match up kind of around, you're doing an outer layer to like match, oops. Like in 5x5, if you're doing, oh, that was actually the example right here. So like, we're matching these two corners around this edge, like that. So in 7x7, it's similar cases to that, except you're now doing more pieces, and you kind of have more freedom. So you can go two up and one down. So here's here's an example that I'll show you that is pretty tricky. So, so right here, let's ignore. I'm trying to get as clean as possible. So you have these two pieces, and this piece right here. These 5 pieces make a bar. The key, and this is essentially you move up, do a U2, and then you move back. Except the key here now, because in 7x7, you can either move 2 layers up or 1 layer up. You now have the opportunity to open up things like this. 2 up, boom. And now if you're on last 4, you can essentially insert like that. Stuff like that exists all the time on 7x7, and it's really important to just kind of know, that's just what you need to look out for. That's a big key on something to look out for when you're doing your 7x7 centers, is the same thing on 5x5 where you kind of rotate at corners around a center, or a middle center. But in this case, you can put 2 layers up or 1 layer up and then 2 down. And that's just kind of open up some more doors. That might not be as advanced as I think. I'm not completely sure. But yeah, so that's general 7x7 advanced techniques. 2x5s are pretty important. Not quite as important. Well, okay, they probably are, but I'm not as good as them because I'm not as practiced on 7x7. 2x5s, and then 3x5s only if they're really easy. The middle bar is probably the most important thing because the middle bars, if you screw it up, it's like not that big of a help to do it right. But if you screw it up, it's super bad. You got to make sure you don't be messing that up because it's only something that's going to ruin your solve. It's not really something that's going to save your solve. And yeah, so that's general 7x7 advanced.